Well, welcome back, everybody. We're excited to have you guys back for our fourth installment of the VTech Immunity Series, webinar series. Today, our series is going to be based on procurement challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are honored to have the panelists. First is the current Director of Procurement for DC Water. He's been in the industry, the procurement industry, for 20 plus years and going on 5 years at DC Water. His name is Joel Grosser. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
We also have with us today Brandon Withers, who's the current small business specialist for the Department of Veteran Affairs. We're honored to have you with us today as well, Brandon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Folks, we are going to open this up for a Q&A at the very end, so please have your questions saved, and we'll open those up to both Joel and Brandon at the very end so they can answer any questions you have or any concerns you have about this marketplace, okay? Thank you so much. So first, I'd just like to talk a little bit about VTech real quick. As you know, we're an IT services firm, a global IT services firm, focused on really 4 technical domains: cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, cloud solutions, and cybersecurity. We serve about 90 clients across the US with 23 field offices. We also have 4 offices in Canada as well. So again, we're honored to have you here today. So I'd like to start these questions off. Joel, I'm going to go ahead and start with you, sir, if that's okay.
Sure.
First question to you, sir, is could you describe how the procurement is structured at DC Water? And then, and second to that, how has COVID-19, this COVID-19 emergency, affected the way DC Water's procurement team currently works?
Okay, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody, depending upon where in the world you might be. So at DC Water, we have a procurement. We have actually 2 procurement teams. The procurement and compliance umbrella is within the finance group, and then the CFO reports into the CEO. But then working back down, we have a vice president of procurement and compliance. And there are 2 major procurement teams under that vice president. I lead one of them. There's another team which focuses on engineering and construction. So I'm actually the director of procurement for goods and services. And then, so within my team, I have category managers, each of which have sourcing specialists that report to them. And then there's the buying team. Those are the folks that are actually writing the purchase orders. Also within procurement, we have a materials management team. They run the warehouses. They do all the MRO purchasing. And then there's a compliance team. The director of compliance reports into the VP as well. And they're the ones that are making sure that we're doing everything we can for disadvantaged business, doing work with them, making sure that contractors are paying subcontractors properly, and we're obeying some of the rules. So that's basically how we're structured. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And did the COVID-19 situation, did it affect the structure of the team at all, or did you guys kind of just attack it business as normal?
So we're still doing all of our work. We're actually probably the major difference is that we're all teleworking now. Unfortunately, the technology has been working very, very well for us. So we're able to communicate, and we really make the extra effort, not just to use conference calls, but to use the video calls so that we can see each other. It's just more of a personal touch. And then we also make time, once a week, just to have what we call a happy hour, which is just basically everyone just chiming in and chatting, and it's a very non-business thing. Hey, how's it going? And so we maintain that personal touch. As far as business as usual, so business as usual is about 1/3 of what we're doing now. Yeah, we're still keeping the lights on. We're still keeping the shop running. And so that used to be a full-time job. Now with responding to the COVID emergency, that has become quite an effort as well. At DC Water, since DC Water is considered to be critical infrastructure, there's a whole set of emergency management procedures that need to be done. We coordinate with the District of Columbia government on that. There are large teams that are set up, all sorts of emergency procedures, and not to mention all the PPE, the personal protective equipment, and all the other things that need to be taken care of. So that's been a big role. The other thing is that we're also switching ERP systems right now. So all those three things are happening at the same time. So we're not lacking for things to do.
That's right. And two key things I took from that is one is, I think companies and organizations were surprised of how effective, folks could still be working remote. A lot of organizations that were not familiar with that model. I think we're going to see more and more folks take to that particular model. And then the second piece is those virtual happy hours. I think those have become very, very popular and very great for morale, especially in these times. So that's great that you guys are doing that. Okay, Brandon, second question for you, sir. What are some of the key steps of procurement over at the Department of Veteran Affairs? And in lieu of that as well, what major changes have you seen?
So a few of the big things, obviously we support the Veterans Health Administration. Those are those folks that are your VA hospitals, your outpatient clinics and things of that nature. So we certainly have a force there that is on the front lines, if you will, and there was a fairly stressful time as far as procuring PPE to make sure those folks were safe. We did have a couple different emergent acquisition processes, if you will, to help that burden to make sure those folks were safe. But by and large, a lot of our standard purchased equipment and things that we buy quite a bit still followed the same general procurement process. And that kind of starts with your requirements definition. Hey, what is it that we need? Why is it we need it, et cetera? Going down to market research, who has the best product at the best price that's going to fulfill our needs. And then, by the way, what's that socioeconomic set aside? Are they service disabled, veteran-owned small business? Are they veteran-owned small business? Because as you know, VA, we have the Veterans First contracting program. If we can help veterans naturally, that's what we're going to go to first. And then going on down to women-owned small business, hub zone, disadvantaged, et cetera. So defining, who can provide it, what their socioeconomic category is, and then we put that out there for solicitation and bid. Kind of your standard procurement process, if you will. With regard to COVID, like I was stating earlier, PPE was the big one. PPE was certainly the big one. I think supply chains and things like that have caught up now. So it's not as much of a crisis. But certainly going forward, I think the next time around something like this happens, we're certainly going to be, not only our department, but government-wide, quite a bit better equipped to handle it and kind of default back to some of those acquisition procedures described in FAR Part 18, which outlines all of your emergent acquisition type things.
And I am going to ask you about that later on in the conversation as well, just about some of your anticipations, if in fact we do have a second wave, but we'll get into that. Okay, so next question is to Joel. What kind of programs are you guys currently doing or not doing as a result of COVID-19? You had mentioned that you were down to kind of a third of the business.
Well, okay, so the whole ERP system thing is that was going to happen regardless, one way or the other. That's not really an answer to the question. That's just me trying to let the world know how busy we are. But as far as work that it directly results from COVID-19, there's certainly the whole PPE procurement. Now, early on, masks, for example, or face coverings were not necessarily recommended for everyone, and so we specifically deferred purchases so that the medical professionals would be able to have them. Now they are, as Brandon said, now masks and face coverings are better. There's better availability of them, and so we are using masks and face coverings on the job, in the office, in the field, and so on. But that was actually quite a large effort between Tyvek suits and face coverings and masks and sanitizer and all of that kind of stuff. Our materials management team actually was not able to keep up with demand. So we diverted some of the resources within the sourcing team, the category management team that reports into me directly, over to help materials management. And that caused resource constraints on the sourcing side. Now, some other things that directly resulted from COVID-19 was checking on supply chains and shoring up supply security, for example, making sure that second sources were activated, and also our communication and outreach to all of our suppliers to let them know what DC Water policy was with regard to coming on site, and masks and face coverings and quarantine and all of that. And there were also one or two instances, I'm not sure how anecdotal they are or factual, but there were some suppliers that were stopped by MPD, Metro Police, because they were entering into crowded areas and, asking where they were going and why and so on. And so we communicated with our suppliers to make sure you have your purchase order, make sure you have this letter that we're sending you saying that DC Water is critical infrastructure and you need to get to where you're going. So all those things, would never happen under a non-emergency situation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, interesting times. I mean, even as an IT services firm, we were getting questions about PPE from some of our vendors, and it's completely outside of our scope, right? So that just shows, the demand that was really there was pretty incredible.
But I also want to emphasize the whole supply security piece. A lot of the things that we get come from overseas. They have to be transported. And even though there may have been some manufacturing slowdowns, what was really causing a concern was the transportation slowdowns. Getting stuff from manufacturing plants to ports or warehouses, and then from ports and warehouses to DC Water. That's where there were some additional concerns. So just that whole logistics supply chain piece needed confirmation.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you a question about that here in a minute too. I'd like to talk a little bit more in depth about that. But Brandon, let me ask you this: in terms of kind of the marketplace, the overall marketplace, and seeing where we were and where we are today, but more importantly, where we are going tomorrow, right? Do you expect an emergence of new NAICS codes in the procurement sector?
I would hope so. I think we might. One of the big things, everything everyone's talking about is cybersecurity, IT infrastructure. You ask people, what is that? And it's like, well, it's cyber, right? So I think kind of narrowing down and defining some of those, because when you look at the NAICS manual, you have a couple that kind of point to that. One of which is 541, 519, other computer-related services. What exactly does that mean? Custom computer programming, things of that nature. It doesn't necessarily spell out cybersecurity, which I certainly see, and I think we as a country are seeing that's something that's very important and highly critical. So how can we appropriately represent that in the marketplace? So, it's 2020, new census year. Hopefully we'll see something like that kind of narrows that down from such a broad requirement or such a broad descriptor.
Okay, great. And then what should a company's strategy be around obtaining NAICS codes? How should a company look at it holistically in the marketplace if they're trying to take on new NAICS codes? What would their strategy look like to you?
Depending on the size and scope of the business and what some of their core functions are, if you will kind of determine that as well. IT companies and things of that nature, they're certainly better positioned to go into those fields because they do have some of that core experience. And then just paying attention to size, right? And when I say size, I mean size standards. Going back to 541, 519, other computer-related services, that has a $30 million threshold, right? So you take your 5-year average receipts, add all those up, divide by 5, and if you're under 30 million, then you're considered a small business. So paying attention to those things, to making sure that you can, that if you are a small business and you want to compete against other small businesses, that you're positioning yourself correctly in order to do that.
That's right. Thank you so much. That's great. That's Joel, and kind of segue on the last thing that you were talking about. You had mentioned transportation around the security. So what are some of the steps that DC Water has taken to ensure the security of those supplies and goods?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I've been through a couple of force majeures and supply restrictions in the past, and so one of the things that we've been doing for a while now is building supply security into our supply strategy. So it's not just whom are we buying from and why, but when and how do we make sure that for critical raw materials, that first of all critical materials are identified, and second of all, what's our plan if the primary source has a problem? So, we consider inventory strategy. We try when possible to have dual sourcing. It might be the vast majority comes from one supplier and a minority comes from another supplier, and that's okay. But if you have a second supplier engaged, then you can work with you can start buying from them, and you keep them interested in it, and it's also in the spirit of competition. So there's a lot of good reasons to do that. You can't always do that, in the medical industry. Co-validating parts and materials is an expensive thing to do. Not impossible, but it can be expensive. But still, you can still identify other suppliers. You can still test them, even if you don't go all the way to validation. At least you're a good part of the way there. So so I guess that's a really long way of saying supply security strategy should be part of your supply strategy, particularly for critical materials. And so that could include where your suppliers store their parts, where they get their parts, or chemical materials from, things along those lines, to how they arrive from the supplier to us, to DC Water. Does that make sense?
Oh no, excellent. Yes, and it's so interesting to hear your thoughts. I mean, we obviously, everybody at home and the audience here with us today saw some of the things that happened around 3G and some of the challenges they had with their masks, and to hear about the integration that you're doing. I think that's really a step in the right direction, kind of a next level approach. That's great, incredible. Okay, Brandon, next question for you, and I think this is a critical one moving forward as well. Is how do you see automation coming into play moving forward with federal procurement?
So data is the big one there. Naturally, market research helps shape those acquisitions. Not so much how are we going to spend this money, but who are we going to make it available to, right? As far as small businesses are concerned. And a lot of times, like when companies are responding to RFIs and sources sought and things of that nature to help scope that acquisition process, they're submitting these synopsises or monologues, if you will, of, hey, my company was founded this year, this is what we do, et cetera, et cetera. Someone then has to go through and read that and start adding things up. So I know one thing that we're looking at doing and that we're trying to do is an EFRI system. So it is kind of factored down to a questionnaire, hey, do you provide this good and service? Yes or no, right? And then you go down to the next good. How many years have you provided this good and service, et cetera, et cetera? So that way we can take and say, we put this requirement out, 10 companies responded, 8 of which were qualified based off of these metrics here, because, we need them to have so many years experience this, they need to have, this threshold here. And that's going to be a very easy way for us to quantify that data to help back up what our acquisition strategy is actually going to be. So I think anything that's going to certainly help get through that data as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible in order to get your required end state is going to be helpful.
Yeah, that's incredible. That talk about efficiencies and moving that, moving the VA forward. That is also very much next stuff. So that's exciting to hear. And do you anticipate other agencies following suit?
I would think so, because at the end of the day, it's going to reduce your timeline, or it's going to reduce your level of burden that's now put on your acquisition folks. So you have your contracting officer who's responsible for all that stuff. That's going to give him a little bit more time to kind of make sure that everything's, more massaged and more tailored, and is a really good product at the end of the day.
Wow, that's exciting. That's exciting. Okay, and then Joel, next question for you. Are there any pricing trends that you can attribute to this COVID-19 situation?
Okay, so the trends have actually been both up and down depending upon the material, and this is where understanding the value chain and the supply chain really counts. So let me give you 2 examples of one where the price has gone up and one where the price has gone down. Okay, mm-hmm. And both as a result of COVID-19. So things that are either oil-based or compete with oil, or based in a raw material that that competes with oil, those prices have by and large gone down. So think gasoline. I remember a couple of, I guess it was about 4 weeks ago, I think I paid $1.39 for a gallon of gasoline. And Brandon, I see your eyes. Yeah, I was kind of surprised too. But yeah, it was, it's back up to about $1.90 now, where I usually go. But still, the price of oil and things that, compete with oil have definitely gone down, and that's a direct result of people not using as much energy or buying as much, oil type products, things along those lines. Direct result of that. Okay, here's another example. so we buy a chemical called sodium hydroxide, right? The way sodium hydroxide is manufactured is it's basically made from salt and water. And the co-product is chlorine, okay? The chlorine co-product mainly goes into making vinyl, all right, polyvinyl chloride, PVC, or vinyl. And one of the major uses of vinyl is the construction industry. Well, the construction industry is quite a bit down. They're not buying as much vinyl. They've reduced the production of chlorine, but the need for sodium hydroxide has not been reduced as a result of COVID. So now you have less supply of a chemical and its price has gone up, okay? So small molecule, complicated supply chain, but it just demonstrates that you need to know, where the value chain is, whether prices are going up or down. So, you asked, are there any price trends? The answer is yes, but it could go either way, depending.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I think the key word or the key phrase from there is knowing the value chain, right? Knowing, trying to anticipate some of those things. I mean, some, I would have to have studied in chemistry class a lot more to know about sodium hydroxide, but to anticipate where some of those things were going, right? I mean, that's pretty incredible, and it also kind of sets the stage if this were to ever happen again. How you can anticipate some of those things, right?
Yeah.
So value chain, that's critical.
And then, on the transportation side, though, even though the price of fuel has gone down, the availability of trucks and truckers have also gone down. And so we've seen transportation surcharges as a result of all of that.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Okay, great. Joel, this question is for you. What are the two most important lessons that a procurement team can learn from this emergency?
Okay, so first of all, I just have to say that I've been really, really happy with our procurement team, that we have all come together. We're working extremely well, even though we're at a distance. And so I think that, relying on the team and trusting the team and trusting people's work ethic and all of that, that's one lesson that's been reinforced. Quite frankly, there were some people at DC Water that have not been advocates of teleworking, for example, and I think they've been converted. So I think that's one. I hope some DC Water folks are listening, but they've just been fantastic. And then the other thing is just going back to supply security and building supply security into your supply strategy. It should be part of it, and understanding the category and so on, that it doesn't, sourcing doesn't end at the solicitation and the contract. It's something that needs to be continually understood and updated, and you need to be reaching out and maintaining a good relationship with your suppliers, because stuff happens.
Yeah, I know, and that's a great point. And again, it's I am amazed at how many folks I talk across the different industries and verticals, that how effective the remote work has been, and really the way it's brought teams back together. So that's great to hear that it's happening at DC Water, and I applaud you guys for that.
Thanks for that.
And thank you so much. What are the federal? Yeah, of course. What are the federal agencies doing from a procurement perspective, if in fact we do see a second wave of this COVID-19?
So I think we're quite a bit better equipped this time around. Like I was saying earlier, going back to the supply chains and things like that, as far as those critical need items, I think we've identified those fairly well at this point. And as Joel had said, you know, making sure that we have different pots that we can pull from, or different suppliers that we can pull from. From what we're seeing at this point, and from what I'm personally seeing at this point, is we're kind of starting to go back to business as usual for procuring goods and services. That I think if there was to be a second wave, then we would be able to better supply folks with what exactly they need. I know our office is buying those types of things and has that in reserve as well. Because again, one of our big clients, one of our big customers is Veterans Health Administration. Those healthcare professionals out there taking care of our veterans, making sure they're equipped to handle that job appropriately. And then a worst case scenario type thing, defaulting back to FAR Part 18, and the emergency acquisitions that are laid out in there.
Yeah, and I certainly hope and pray we don't ever face a situation like we did back in February and March. But I think as a country, as a federal government, as industry, as across the board, I think we will be better prepared, right, if this were to happen again. But again, I just want to thank you two for your time today. You guys have been very educational and thought-provoking in the questions that you answered, and we appreciate your time so much.